Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we already complete episode 10 of our Rimworld Anomaly Sea Ice Challenge with the transhumanist paragons of Pandroth. Last time we left off after an episode that was in some ways a bit more down to earth than we might be used to. We had tribals man-hunting animals but no entities, and so we used that period of relative calm and quiet to build the outlines of a new base. And a good chunk of today's episode will be us moving into that base, so episode 10 perhaps sort of the beginning of the second chapter for the Paragons of Pandroth. Now, moving from one base to another is unfortunately also not the most exciting process, so I think we are going to time-lapse this a bit. Overall, I would rate the entire endeavor a solid C+. I will explain why in just a moment. First of all, though, we are informed that the crashed refugee we rescued last episode has made a full recovery. And before she can make it off the map, we also unlock disruptor flares. These flare packs are very useful against invisible creatures like sight stealers or revenants. And up next, let us look into psychophagy, a new type of psychic ritual to increase the invoker's psychic sensitivity. For our advanced project, we will then also look into ghoul enhancements. Obviously, this will take some time to complete. But despite their short time with us, our two ghouls Midnight and Jay have already been deciding factors in many fights, so I imagine that anything we can do to make them stronger would be very welcome. Our new home then slowly but steadily taking shape while our refugee makes it off the map without freezing to death, and so our faction relationship increases. Now, I mentioned earlier that the entire moving process here could have perhaps gone a bit smoother, and I attribute that to a couple of factors. First and foremost, I think we have waited just a tiny bit too long to make this move. Our small shack over on the other side of the map has reached a significant size, and transferring all of that from one place to another is an incredibly time-consuming task. Add to that the fact that mood in our colony is still all but stable. This here will certainly not be the last mental break you see in this episode, which, as you can imagine, complicates things even further. I also admit I probably underestimated how difficult moving bases on the sea ice would be, starting with the snow that obviously reduces movement speed significantly, to the complete lack of resources, meaning that everything we want to have in this new place should be hauled over from the old one, to finally the temperatures, and admittedly we have probably picked the worst time of the year to do this. But even in the warmer months, you can't just get a hydroponics setup already up and running. The requirements for power and heating are just so demanding that for an early game colony like ours, it will be almost impossible to build it twice. So either you heat up and grow in the old place or the new one, but it won't be easy to do so in both. And unfortunate events like Maniac drinking some yak milk during his mental break and consequently suffering food poisoning only increase frustrations. Nonetheless, we also have some positives, like Elpis here now celebrating his 10th birthday. The description here also says that Elpis now wants to spend more time reading about insect biology, and that he wants to write a story about a kind kid who hunts feral mechanoids. In addition to all of that flavor, he has also reached the highest possible growth tier, and that means his 3 skills and trait will now be the following. First of all, we will go all in with his role as a doctor. That is a role that we are still dearly missing. Having another pawn who can do a bit of socializing also can't hurt. And finally, perhaps we will eventually find the time to do some artwork. As an upcoming writer, that seems to be a path that Elpis would not be opposed to. Most importantly, however, and I still cannot believe how lucky we got here, Elpis now receives the psychically hypersensitive trait, and this will now make his role as our void provoker quite a bit more interesting, and it also opens up many opportunities down the line. I think we will get to those sooner rather than later. Maniac meanwhile force harvesting the not entirely mature heal root in our old base. His mental break has thankfully subsided, and the sun lamp has already been moved anyway, so these plants will never grow beyond the stage they are currently in. Speaking of plants, by the way, we unfortunately still do not have enough power in our new base to turn on our hydroponic setup again. And while we work on fixing that, we also learn that ghouls and the sea ice might not match as well as I had initially thought. Without receiving any sort of warning, our captured ghoul Gracie drops dead. The reason? Hypothermia. Apparently, even the powerful ghoul regeneration can't stop that. Now at least Gracie left us a shard and our other entities are thankfully also not affected. Still, this is of course a bit of a blow to our anomaly research efforts. which are obviously also getting relocated. As you can see, we are already constructing a brand new holding facility right on our new premises. On the early morning of this episode's third day then, the nutrient paste dispenser moves in, and with it also the second chem fuel generator, and with that we now have most of our necessities transferred. Now the slight problem is that it took us 3 days to get here, and while we had stockpiled a good amount of rice, most of that has now been consumed, and so we are not only close to running out of food, but also close to running out of chem fuel, so the next few days here could get a bit tricky. A few hours later then, we received the episode's first quest, and as interesting as the rewards here may be, I just don't see us ever being in a position where we will be able to complete this. In total, even if we build everything else out of steel, we still need about 800 stone blocks to finish this monument, and I just don't see that happening, especially not while we are in the process of building an entire new base. And so let us keep working on that base, at least for the time being. And as if that by itself was not already challenging enough, Randy also throws a medium-intensity psychic drone at us. This one will now affect Lauren and Ellie, potentially crippling 2 of our 3 constructors and 2 more of our haulers, which could be noticeable even though moving furniture is still a construction task and therefore can be performed by Vulek and Nazim. I suppose we'll have to see how the situation unfolds. Speaking of Nazim, he is currently in the process of transferring the Side Stealer into its new home, while Vulek turns valuable meat into chem fuel. The problem here, not our 2 main generators, those still have enough fuel to last us for about 1.5 days. Instead, it's the generator fueling our deep drill, which, as you can imagine, is quite integral to our base building efforts, although at this point we can also go ahead and start deconstructing some of our old base. Not everything though. For example, we should keep our animal stables, as after the unfortunate death of her partner Dawn, Yak Mother Jude has given birth, and I think in this case it's fair to reuse the name. Dawn barely lived for half an episode, so the new Yak will now receive the name of Dawn Jr., just so that the Patreon naming rights tier is still worth something. At this point, we also had to move one of our chem fuel generators into our greenhouse just to slightly increase the temperatures inside, and while we do that, Vulek gets a bit too eager around the old base, now allowing Elpis to have his first go at doctoring, even though as a Sangophage, Vulek would most likely be able to heal the crack all by himself. And despite critical mood levels for Ellie and Lauren, Nazim is then the next one to suffer a mental break, thankfully though shortly after transferring all the remaining entities, so at least those are now safely contained and where we want them to be. However, Nazim will not remain the only colonist out of action for a while. As you can see, it is high time for Vulek to start another death rest, and just like that we are down to 4. And perhaps to raise the mood a bit, celebrating that we've got new rice planted, Elpis decides to throw a party. Very disappointingly though, it is a party without food, as we have officially consumed the last of our reserves. Now don't panic, we have more rice coming in, but that will take a while. So our colonists will probably go hungry for a day or 2, and that is probably not going to help anyone's mood. Still, we make it all the way to midnight without any incidents, and not only that, we even get all the way to the next morning. Then it's Ellie's turn. I suppose that was to be expected. Because of her gourmand trait, the lack of food hitting her a bit harder than the rest of our colonists, Lauren meanwhile remains steadfast. And she is rewarded for keeping things together as the psychic drone now comes to an end, and in the afternoon so does the roughly day-long starvation. Maniac here harvesting a few rice plants a little early. Of course, this will not get us the full yield, but it gets us enough to make a few nutrient-paced meals, and hopefully that keeps our pawns from revolting until the rest is fully matured. By the way, while we are talking about plant work, in the last episode we also took this prisoner here, who we have temporarily transferred into the warmth of our greenhouse, and the main reason that we have captured her is that she is good at plants, although at the moment the hypothermia has slowed down our recruitment efforts somewhat. On the next morning then, we are ready for the real harvest, and with that our food and chem fuel problems should be behind us. Again, we probably could have stockpiled just a bit more before making this move, but all things considered, I think we should be fine. Now, most of this first harvest here will in fact be used to turn it into camp fuel pretty much immediately, so food might continue to be tight for another day or two, but then again, a full hydroponic setup will be capable of feeding much more than just 6 colonists, especially so if those colonists eat exclusively nutrient paste. Ellie's mental break then comes to an end, but it is replaced by Lauren more or less right away. Once again, our colonists going hungry for a short while, not exactly easy on their mood. Still, at least Ellie is in a stable enough state to construct a small room for our animals here, and early on the next morning she can lead Jude and Don Jr. to their new home. Apart from that, the day remains mostly uneventful. As you can imagine, progress is not exactly fast, with Vulek still death resting, Lauren on a mental break, and Elpis also spending most of his time learning. But our new base finally has all that we need to survive out here on the sea ice, something that our prisoner here is unfortunately not going to participate in. In just a few moments, the hypothermia will sadly take her away, and moving her to one of our warmer rooms to combat that would pose additional logistical challenges. But actually, it's not all bad. For now, Elpis can use her to gain some valuable medical experience, and for our plants problem, we may have a different solution already lined up. A set of cargo pods in the afternoon then, providing us with valuable uranium. At the moment, we probably don't have too much of a use for that, but sooner or later, Lifterbot Rico will haul it back home for us. By the way, a second Lifterbot is probably also something that we should have manufactured before moving our base, but again, all of that is easy to say now that the episode is halfway done. One thing then that I had factored in, the loss of this quest right here. Yes, it would have been a rather easy one, I think, to attack a pirate settlement with only 6 members, but our focus was elsewhere and actually still is, as our much more psychically sensitive Elpis will now perform another Draw Animals ritual. The Manhunter chance now down to 33%, and that's with just 1 shard beacon. Keep in mind that we can still construct 3 more. An infection for our prisoner then, sealing the fate that was honestly already sealed. Elpis's ritual meanwhile coming to an end in the early morning, and it is a success, so in just a moment we'll find out what kind of creatures Randy has in store for us. Unfortunately though, first of all, our prisoner succumbs to the cold, the infection and the blood loss. I suppose getting our cells and stable heated up will be something to work on soon. However, for the moment it's time to go hunting. Just like the first time we performed this ritual, it's Arctic wolves, 5 of them, and they arrive just as Vulek is ready to wake up from his death rest again. And with our Sanguophage back in our ranks, he will also be the one to lure the wolves over to us, using his hemogen powers to get in, aggro them and then get back out. And with our ghouls manning the front lines, this should not be too tricky. Once again, we are hunting with some of the best weapons in the game here, so once more our 2 ghouls barely have to get involved. And while Ellie starts butchering, Vulek fires up the subcore encoder. It's time that we create ourselves another mechanoid. Now, this particular mechanoid will be an agri-hand. As the name already suggests, a mechanoid used for plant work. Not quite as efficient as a human, actually far from it, but we could make 2 if that becomes a problem, and either way, for now the main focus is on freeing up Maniac, who is spending pretty much all of his time sowing and harvesting rice and not deep drilling, just because it is such a fast-growing crop. Now, the gestation process will once again not be instantly completed, but instead takes a few days, during which we first of all unlock Psychophagy. So now we have the ability to perform a ritual to increase someone's psychic sensitivity, possibly very useful if we think back to a Psycaster like Light from the last series. And following suit with unlocking new rituals, up next let's unlock Chronophagy, a ritual to make a person younger. This perhaps not as needed, considering that our oldest pawn Maniac is deathless, but deathless also does not mean that he won't get age-related ailments, so this could be of some use. Vulek, meanwhile, fresh off of his death rest, wastes no time and suffers a mental break of his own while gathering steel, and this does come at a rather unfortunate moment in time, because in the evening, with our Sanguophage still rambling, we receive this quest. We all know it by now, we need to protect a crashed imperial shuttle. One of the rewards here, actually another colonist, although the combination of the misandrist to smart and jealous traits makes me think that she would be a pain to deal with, not to mention that we have just found another solution for our plant work. Either way, we have 11 hours here to make a decision, and we will take every last second of that time if it means that Vulik will be able to participate in this quest. Unfortunately though, even 10 hours later, Vulik has still not snapped out of it, and we have no other choice but to accept if we want to grab any of the rewards. And speaking of rewards, we will grab the Eltex helmet. After all, we might just have a talented Psycaster growing up in our ranks. The shuttle, meanwhile, crashing down near our old base, and its arrival thankfully also makes Vulik think clearly again. And so, after everyone has grabbed one last meal, it's time to rush over to defend the shuttle. We will encounter Itakin pirates here, who are very well adapted to the cold, but perhaps not so much to bullets. While we wait, Vulik can also already deconstruct the crashed shuttle, the Imperials won't mind, and just a short moment later our enemies arrive. Only 7 of them, accompanied by a few boars, but we can see 1 or 2 bolt-action rifles among them, so we should keep our distance. The Imperial Guards then, quick to rush ahead, taking some of the fire off of our ghouls, who in turn are doing their best to draw the attention away from our colonists. Keep in mind that in order to stay warm, everyone is wearing parkas, so the most we have in terms of protection currently are flak vests, and those alone won't do too much good. At the same time, however, our ghouls might be tough to take down, especially so in the case of Jay, but they are not invincible either, so we should be a bit careful here. And there we go, it did not go entirely without injuries, Ellie and Maniac both suffering some wounds, but the pirates are fleeing and the Imperials are saved. That is, at least the 2 who survived, and the threat is not over yet either, as Randy decides that this might be the perfect moment to send a psychic ship our way. This one thankfully only a low-intensity drone, but it affects all males, so the majority of our colony, and we are not exactly in fighting shape at the moment. Especially the 4 Lancers here could get tricky if we don't play our cards right, so let's rest and recover at least for a little while, as we unfortunately also take note of the fact that our 2 yaks have suffered from hypothermia too. They might be comfortable up to -45 degrees, but this is the sea ice, so it tends to get a bit colder than that. A heater quickly constructed should prevent anything worse, but still, Don Jr. has lost 2 of his hooves. What can I say? Your naming rights seem a little cursed to me. If you have been wondering, by the way, why the quest reward has not yet arrived, that's because Imperial Guard number 2 here has unfortunately taken a bit too long tending to his injuries, suffered hypothermia as a result, and is now down and dying in a few short moments. Luckily, the quest does not depend on him, the only person it needs is already safely inside of the shuttle, and so the Eltex helmet does arrive shortly after. While Maniac then spends his morning gathering steel and avoiding falling roofs, we have a drifter arrive, a visitor who wants to talk. Looking fairly normal so far, perhaps apart from her unusual ability to transmute steel into other materials. Her skill set, the sickly trait and a bite scar also do not make her the perfect colonist, but that ability alone might be a game changer considering our limited resources, so I guess let's hear what she has to say. Ellie, however, will not be the one to do the talking, at least not this kind. Instead, just like Vulik earlier, she is now insanely rambling, while our Sanguiphage himself greets the visitor. And what do you know? She wants to join us. Well, a medical skill of 8 and a mysterious transmute steel ability could be useful, even though it clearly says here that there is something that she's not telling us. But for now, let's take her in and see how that goes. That also means that we need to give out a new name, so from the list of patron supporters in the naming rights tier and above, we go with the not at all ominous Nightshade. Now, Nightshade, currently in tribal clothing, might need something slightly warmer, and luckily we have a few spare pieces at the old base, but still that is not quite enough, and on her way back she gets the first frostbite injuries. On the bright side, our agri-hand is done, so let's have Vulek take it out of the gestator and name it too. This one will now be named Jerome, after patron Jerome Pettazzoni. And its arrival could not have come any later, as we are now struck by a solar flare, and this could once again make life very difficult for the next day or so, as we are about to lose all of our crops and heat during one of the coldest periods out here on the sea ice. Another structure construction quest, by the way, can swiftly be ignored. Once again, we will never amass enough materials for this, while our new member demands a bit more attention, now suffering a mental break that has her attempt to free our entities. Considering that we have a rather dangerous revenant among them, let's perhaps do something about that. Nazim quickly has her captured, and even though the room will eventually cool down, we'll place her into our greenhouse for now, to keep her at least somewhat warm. So, that would be our situation right now, out of power, on the edge of multiple mental breaks, with a mysterious guest in our ranks who just tried to free our entities, and with a psychic droner and several mechanoids also still looming in the distance. And I think that's a great, albeit very chaotic moment to make the cut for today. I guess we'll simply have to tackle one threat after another next time. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can of course go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or check out and maybe even pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.